They thought she was just the help, a ghost in a gray uniform gliding through the halls of power, unseen and unheard. But when the most dangerous man in the room spoke a secret language to steal $10 billion, he did not know that the woman pouring his water was the only one listening. One sentence changed everything. One maid saved an empire, and it started with the crash of crystal on a marble floor. The air in the 50th floor conference room was thin and cold, conditioned to a perfect 68 degrees that kept the billionaires awake and the servants shivering. Julian Thorne sat at the head of the obsidian table, looking every inch the master of the universe. His suit was tailored in London. His watch cost more than a house, and his arrogance was the only thing heavier than his portfolio. He was minutes away from signing the deal of the century, a merger with Al-Fayed Global that would turn Thorne Dynamics into the world's largest energy tech conglomerate. Across from him sat Sheikh Al-Fayed, a man whose smile was as sharp as a blade. The room was silent save for the scratch of fountain pens and the hum of anticipation. Everyone was smiling, the lawyers, the board members, and especially Camilla Vance Julian's fiancée, who sat at his right-hand, eyes gleaming with the reflection of future diamonds. Nia Washington stood in the corner, her back pressed against the cold glass wall, holding a heavy silver tray of water and crystal glasses. She was invisible to them, just a pair of hands to serve and a shadow to ignore. She shifted her weight, trying to ease the ache in her feet from a double shift. Her mother's hospital bills were due in 2 days, and she needed every hour she could get. She kept her eyes down, trained to be part of the furniture, but her ears were open. Julian reached for his platinum pen. The heavy document lay open before him. Clause 14. Gleaming innocently under the lights, the sheikh leaned toward his assistant, his voice dropping to a low murmur in a dialect of Arabic, rarely heard in Western boardrooms. He smiled at Julian while he spoke. Assuming his words were a private victory lap, he said he is signing his own death warrant, Clause 14. B allows us to seize majority control for $1. If the stock fluctuates by 2%, he is handing us his legacy, and the fool is thanking us for the privilege. Nia froze. The tray in her hands felt suddenly light as the blood rushed in her ears. She knew that dialect. She had spent 5 years translating classified documents for the UN. Before her life fell apart, she knew the syntax of betrayal. She looked at Julian. His hand was moving the nib of the pen, hovering millimeters from the paper. If he signed that line, he would lose everything within a week. The company, his name, his future. It would all be gone, stolen by a sentence he couldn't read. She looked around the room. The lawyers were checking their phones. Camilla was admiring her reflection in the dark table. No one else knew. No one else could save him. Fear gripped her throat tight and suffocating. She was a maid. If she spoke, she would be fired. If she caused a scene, she could be blacklisted. But if she stayed silent, an innocent man would be destroyed. She watched the pen touch the paper, and instinct took over. Deeper than fear, louder than protocol, Nia stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't mean to trip, but her hands shook with such force that she let go. The silver tray hit the edge of the table with a sound like a gunshot. Crystal glasses shattered, sending shards flying like diamonds. Water cascaded across the table, soaking the contract, instantly turning the legal binding into a wet blur of blue ink. Julian jumped back, cursing as water splashed onto his Italian silk tie. The room erupted in gasps. Security surged forward, but Nia didn't look down at the mess. She didn't apologize. She didn't shrink. She looked straight into Julian's furious eyes and spoke with a voice that cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. "Don't sign it." The sound of the slap cracked through the room louder than the breaking glass. Camilla Vance stood over Nia, chest-heaving eyes, blazing with a fury that went beyond a ruined dress. She looked like a woman who had just seen her winning lottery ticket burn. "You stupid, clumsy girl!" Camilla shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, stripping away the veneer of elegance she wore like armor. "Look what you did to my dress. Look what you did to this deal." She didn't wait for an answer. She raised her hand and struck Nia again. This time harder, the force of it knocking Nia back a step. Her cheek burning with instant heat. The room gasped, but no one moved to stop it. Julian Thorne slammed his fist onto the wet table, sending water jumping from the surface. His face was a mask of humiliation and rage. He wasn't looking at the contract anymore. He was looking at the woman who had just turned his crowning moment into a circus. "Nia, do you have any idea the magnitude of what is happening here?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You have embarrassed me in front of my partners. You have disgraced this company. Get out. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out the window." The security guard stepped forward, hands reaching for Nia's arms, ready to drag her away like trash. Nia stood her ground. She tasted blood on her lip. Metallic and sharp, the sting on her cheek was throbbing, pulsing in time with her heart. But beneath the pain, something colder and harder was taking shape. She looked at Julian, the man she had served coffee to every morning for 6 months, the man who couldn't see past her apron to the mind beneath. He was blind, willfully, arrogantly blind. She looked at Camilla, whose outrage seemed too desperate, too theatrical, and then she looked at Sheikh Al-Fayed. The sheikh was watching the scene with amused detachment, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if he were watching a play he had written himself. He thought he had won. He thought the chaos was his cover. Nia took a breath. She pushed the hair back from her face, her hand steady. She didn't look at the guards. She didn't look at Julian. She locked her gaze directly onto the sheikh, and when she spoke, the English language fell away, replaced by the fluid, rhythmic cadence of the sheikh's own native tongue. "Your Excellency," she said, her Arabic flawless, the dialect precise and commanding, cutting through the noise like a knife through silk. "You speak of partnership. While you hide a dagger in the ink, you are exploiting their ignorance of our language to set a trap that will bleed this company dry." The room died. The silence that fell was absolute, terrifyingly heavy. The kind of silence that happens when a bomb stops ticking right before it explodes. The sheikh's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, stunned calculation. His eyes narrowed, assessing the woman in the gray uniform who had just spoken to him, not as a servant, but as an equal. Julian froze, his mouth half open, the anger draining out of him, replaced by confusion. Camilla lowered her hand, her face draining of color. Nia didn't stop. She stepped closer to the table, her voice rising, ringing with authority. "Clause 14. B is not a formality," she continued in Arabic. "It is a hostile acquisition trigger, you assume, because I clean your floors, that I cannot read your fine print. But dignity does not have a dress code, sir, and a lie sounds the same in every language." Camilla's laughter cut through the tension like breaking glass. It was a shrill, desperate sound that shattered the momentary awe Nia had commanded. Camilla stepped forward, placing herself physically between Julian and the truth. Her face was pale, but her eyes were frantic, darting from the sheikh to Julian. Calculating the damage control in real time, she grabbed Julian's arm, her nails digging into his expensive suit fabric. "Julian, listen to me. She is lying. She is sick." Camilla shouted, her voice rising an octave, aiming to drown out any lingering doubt. "Look at her, Julian. She is a maid. She cleans toilets. Do you really think she knows international contract law? She is having an episode." Camilla turned to face the room, eyes wide with feigned terror, posing as the protective partner. "I didn't want to worry you, darling, but I saw her file in the staff locker room yesterday when I was looking for my coat. She has a history. Julian paranoid schizophrenia. She thinks she is a secret agent. She thinks everyone is plotting against her." It was a lie so bold, so disgusting that for a second, Nia couldn't even breathe. She stared at Camilla, watching the woman construct a reality out of thin air to save her own skin. Camilla's eyes locked with Nia's for a brief second, and in them, Nia saw not fear, but a cold, reptilian warning. She was protecting her payout. She was protecting the millions she had been promised for ensuring this deal went through, and she would burn Nia to the ground to keep it. Julian looked at Nia, his gaze shifting from the confident woman who had just spoken fluent Arabic back to the gray uniform, the scuffed shoes, the tray on the floor. His class bias kicked in hard, an instinctive defense mechanism. It was easier to believe the woman in diamonds than the woman in rags. It was safer to believe his fiancée than the help his ego couldn't handle the possibility that he was the fool and the maid was the savior. He straightened his jacket, his face hardening into a mask of cold disdain. "Get her out of here!" Julian barked, his voice devoid of the earlier hesitation. "Security remove this woman immediately and ensure she never sets foot in this building again." The guards surged forward, grabbing Nia by the arms, roughly their fingers digging into her biceps. She didn't fight them. She didn't scream. She knew that in this moment her voice had been stolen by a lie. Julian turned his back on her, facing the sheikh with an apologetic smile, desperate to salvage the deal. "Please forgive the interruption." "Your Excellency," he said, smoothing his tie. "It seems our screening process for the cleaning staff needs immediate review. We will handle the disturbance." Camilla let out a breath of relief, smoothing her dress, casting one last triumphant sneer at Nia as she was dragged toward the double doors. The grip on her arms was bruising, but Nia didn't struggle. She walked with the guards, making them match her pace rather than dragging her. She locked eyes with Julian Thorne. He was adjusting his cuffs, avoiding her gaze, trying to wash his hands of the mess, but Nia wouldn't let him look away. She stared at him until the sheer weight of her silence forced him to meet her eyes. "You think you are saving your company?" Nia said, her voice low and steady, cutting under the hum of the air conditioning. "You think you are removing a disturbance, but you are removing the only person in this room who told you the truth." Julian sneered, his face twisted in that ugly way people look when they are trying to justify their own cruelty. "Get her out of here," he muttered, turning back to his papers. Nia laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked any humor. "I am not crazy, Julian," she said, her voice rising just enough to command the room again, "but you are blind, you are standing on the edge of a cliff, and you are firing the only guide who brought a map." She reached for the plastic ID clipped to her apron, the badge that labeled her simply as staff number 429. She ripped it off the clip. Snapping with a finality that echoed, she tossed it onto the obsidian table. It slid across the polished surface, spinning until it stopped right in front of Camilla's claw. "Like hands, keep it." Nia said, "I never fit in a box that small anyway." The guards yanked her back, stumbling her slightly. She used the momentum, the chaotic blur of movement, to drop her hand to her side in her pocket. Her fingers brushed the cold metal of her old dictaphone pen, a relic from her days recording summits in Geneva. It was muscle memory instinct honed by years of espionage and diplomacy, as the guard on her right shifted his grip. Nia feigned a stumble, her knee hitting the floor near the table leg. "Get up!" The guard barked, hauling her by the arm, but the move was done in that split second of confusion. She had slid the sleek black pen under the lip of the heavy conference table, its recording light taped over its microphone, wide open and listening. Nia stood up, brushing off her apron. She didn't look back at the device. She didn't look at the sheikh, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. She just walked toward the doors, head high, leaving behind her name, her job, and a ticking time bomb that would catch every single word they said the moment she was gone. The silence in the boardroom was heavy enough to crush bones. Julian sat at the head of the table, a smug smile plastered across his face, believing he had just secured the merger of the century by removing the one obstacle in his path. He pushed the contract forward, the paper sliding across the polished mahogany with a soft hiss. "Sign here, Your Excellency," Julian said, his voice dripping with false charm. "We have cleared the room of distractions." Sheikh Al-Fayed did not reach for the document. Instead, he reached for the gold fountain pen lying next to it. He held it for a moment, the light catching the metal, and then, with a deliberate, echoing click, he capped it shut. The sound was not loud, but in the terrified quiet of the room, it sounded like a gavel falling on a death sentence. Julian's smile faltered. "Is something wrong, sir?" The sheikh stood up slowly, his movements graceful but radiating an intensity that made the air turn cold. He looked down at Julian, his dark eyes filled not with anger but with a profound disappointment that was far worse. "You have made a grave calculation error, Mr. Thorne." Julian stood up, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. I don't understand. I removed the disruption. I handled the maid who was speaking out of turn. She was jeopardizing the meeting. That is exactly the problem, the sheikh replied, his voice steady and sharp. You mistook integrity for insubordination. That woman, Maya, was the only person in this entire building brave enough to tell me the truth about your supply chain issues. She risked her livelihood to save my investment, while you sat here and fed me comfortable lies. The sheikh pushed the unsigned contract back toward Julian. It slid off the edge of the table and fluttered to the floor, landing near Julian's expensive Italian shoes. I do not do business with men who punish honesty to protect their own egos. You fired the only honest person in this room. The deal is canceled. Effective immediately. Before Julian could stammer a defense, the sheikh turned and walked toward the double doors. His entourage flanked him instantly, a wall of silence moving with purpose. Julian chased after him, desperation cracking his voice. Wait, Your Excellency, please, we can fix this. Bring her back. I will hire her back right now. I will double her salary. But the doors swung shut, leaving Julian alone with his terrified board members. The room felt suddenly suffocating. Almost instantly, the vibration of a dozen cell phones buzzing against the table broke the silence. A young analyst in the corner gasped, his eyes glued to the massive screen mounted on the wall. Mr. Thorne, look! Julian whipped his head around. The ticker tape for his company, which had been green all morning, suddenly flashed red. It plummeted. A massive sell-off triggered by the news of the sheikh's departure leaking to the market. The numbers tumbled down like a waterfall. 10%, 20%, 30%. In seconds, millions of dollars evaporated into the digital ether. Julian collapsed into his chair, staring at the screen, the red light reflecting in his wide, horrified eyes. He realized too late that when he fired the maid, he hadn't just lost an employee. He had thrown away his entire empire. The heavy oak doors vibrated in their frames, the echo of the sheikh's departure slamming into the room like a physical blow. Julian stood frozen for a single terrifying second, his eyes locked on the space where the billionaire had just stood. Then the paralysis broke, shattering into 1,000 jagged shards of pure, unadulterated fury. He whipped around, his face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson, searching for a target, for a reason, for anything that wasn't his own incompetence. Get me legal, Julian roared, his voice cracking with the strain of his rage. He pointed a trembling finger at the empty chair where Nia had sat moments before. That girl, that interfering low-level nobody. She did this. She poisoned the well. His head of legal, a man named Sterling, who looked like he was about to be sick, stepped forward, tentatively. Sir, the market is reacting. The shareholders are already calling. We need a statement. We need to stabilize the narrative. I will give you a narrative, Julian spat, advancing on Sterling until he was inches from the man's face. The narrative is that we were sabotaged. You are going to draft a lawsuit against Nia immediately. I want her buried under so much paperwork she won't be able to breathe for the next decade. Sterling blinked, confused. On what grounds, sir? She just answered a question. I don't care what it looked like, Julian screamed, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the water glasses rattled. You charge her with commercial sabotage, violation of non-disclosure agreements, corporate espionage. I don't care if you have to invent the statutes. You paint her as a mole. You paint her as incompetent. You make her the villain of this story so the shareholders have someone to hate that isn't me. Do you understand? I want her life ruined. I want her name to be toxic. If she ever tries to get a job sweeping floors in this city again, I want her background check to scream liability. He paced the room like a caged tiger, his breathing ragged. She cost me billions. I will cost her everything. In the corner of the room, amidst the panic of junior analysts scrambling to answer phones and the frantic typing of the PR team, Camilla sat perfectly still. She watched Julian unravel with the cold, detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. A small, cruel smile played on her lips, barely visible, but sharp enough to cut. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone, shielding the screen from the chaos around her. Her thumbs moved gracefully over the glass. The message was short, precise, and devastating. Plan B, she typed. Got rid of the translator girl. She hit send and watched the delivery notification appear. Julian was so busy screaming, so busy constructing a lie to save his own skin, that he didn't even realize the real knife was already in his back. He thought he was the predator, destroying a weak servant to survive. He had no idea he was just another pawn being moved off the board. Camilla slipped the phone back into her pocket, her expression smoothing into a mask of faux concern as she stood up to join the fray. The empire was burning, and she intended to be the one standing on the ashes. The air in the Bronx apartment was heavy with the smell of old dust and the sharp chemical scent of antiseptic. It was a suffocating little box where the paint peeled from the ceiling in long gray strips like dead skin. The only sound that mattered in Nia's world was the rhythmic mechanical hiss of the ventilator beside the bed. That machine was the only thing keeping her mother in this world, and every breath it pumped cost money that Nia no longer had. She sat on a plastic folding chair, her head resting near her mother's hand, watching the chest rise and fall. It was a fragile piece that shattered instantly when a heavy fist pounded against the front door. The wood groaned under the assault. Nia jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. "Open this door, Nia." It was Mr. Russo, the landlord. His voice was rough and muffled through the thin barrier, but the anger was clear enough. "I am not playing games with you anymore. You are 2 months behind. I have been patient because of your mother, but my patience is gone. You have until sundown. If I do not have the cash in my hand, I am calling the sheriff and putting your things on the curb. Do you hear me? Sundown." Nia did not move. She did not breathe. She just stared at the door, willing him to go away, knowing that he would not. She had $12 to her name. $12 to fight a world that wanted to consume her. She looked back at her mother, whose eyes were closed, lost in a coma that they could not afford to treat and could not afford to give up on. The pounding stopped eventually, replaced by the heavy, retreating footsteps of a man who held their shelter in his hands. Her phone buzzed on the small table, vibrating against the hard surface. Nia reached for it, her hand trembling. It was an email notification. The subject line was in bold red letters. "Urgent legal notice regarding Julian Thorne Enterprises." Her stomach twisted into a knot of ice. She tapped the screen, and the document loaded slowly. It was a formal letter from a law firm that charged more per hour than she had earned in her entire life. The words swam before her eyes. Gross negligence, defamation, commercial sabotage. They were accusing her of destroying the deal with the sheikh intentionally. And then she saw the number. The demand for damages. $5 million. The figure was so large it felt imaginary. $5 million for speaking the truth. $5 million for doing her job. Julian knew she could not pay it. He knew she could not pay $500, let alone $5 million. This was not about money. This was an execution. He wanted to bury her so deep that she would never see the sun again. Nia dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She looked around the room, at the water stains on the wall, at the flickering light bulb, at the woman in the bed who depended on her for everything. The walls felt like they were closing in, shrinking until they crushed the air out of her lungs. This was the reality of the war she had unwittingly started. Julian fought with lawyers and lawsuits. She fought with eviction notices and prayer. She slid down from the chair to the cold floor, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to hold her shattering world together. There was no way out. The billionaire had decided to step on her, and she was just the ant beneath his boot. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled executive suite was sterile and suffocating. Julian sat at his massive oak desk, staring blankly at the digital ticker tape on the wall, where the value of his company continued to bleed out in red numbers. He had spent the last 24 hours raging at his staff, blaming everyone but himself for the catastrophe with the sheikh. The door to his office swung open with a violence that made him jump. It was not his usual yes-man attorney Sterling. It was Elias Vance, the firm's senior legal consultant, a man who had not stepped foot in the office in years unless there was a crisis of biblical proportions. Vance did not offer a greeting. He marched to the desk and threw a thick stack of documents onto the polished wood. The papers slid across the surface, stopping inches from Julian's hand. "Read it," Vance commanded, his voice low and trembling with a mixture of shock and fury. Julian frowned, straightening his tie in a futile attempt to regain authority. I have read it, Elias. It is the contract. The deal is dead because of that girl. No, Vance cut him off sharp as a whip. The deal is dead because you are a fool. We had the Arabic text analyzed by a forensic linguist this morning. We wanted to build a stronger case against the maid. We wanted to prove she was lying. Vance leaned over the desk, his face inches from Julian's. But she was not lying, Julian. Look at clause 14. B. Julian looked down at the highlighted text, though he could not read the script. Vance tapped the paper with a manicured finger. The wording here is not standard partnership language. It is an archaic binding clause used in aggressive acquisitions. If you had signed this document, the sheikh would have legally owned 51% of your assets within the fiscal quarter. It was a trap. A hostile takeover hidden in plain sight. The room seemed to spin. The air conditioner hummed, but Julian suddenly felt covered in a cold sweat. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of realization. She was right, Vance whispered, and the quietness of his voice was more terrifying than a scream. The maid. The girl you had security drag out of the building. She was the only person in the room who knew how to read this dialect. She was not trying to sabotage you. She was trying to save you. Julian felt the bile rise in his throat. He remembered Nia's face, the desperation in her eyes as she tried to warn him. He remembered the way he had sneered at her, how he had called her worthless. And then a new thought struck him, a thought so horrifying it nearly brought him to his knees. Oh, God! Julian gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. What is it? Vance asked, his eyes narrowing. I sued her. Julian choked out the words. I instructed Sterling to file a lawsuit this morning. Commercial sabotage, defamation. I demanded $5 million in damages. I sent the process servers to her home. Vance stared at him, and for the first time, Julian saw genuine disgust in the older man's eyes. You did what? You sent a multi-million-dollar lawsuit to a woman living in the slums because she tried to keep you from losing your company. I didn't know, Julian stammered, standing up, his legs shaking. I thought she was the enemy. You are the enemy, Vance said, straightening his jacket. You just declared war on your own guardian angel. If the press finds out about this, if they find out you are suing a poor girl for telling the truth while you tried to sign away the company, you are finished. Julian looked at his phone. The notification from his legal team still glowed on the screen. Lawsuit filed. He had to stop it. He had to stop the machine he had set in motion before it crushed the only innocent person in this entire sordid mess. He grabbed his keys and ran for the door, the silence of the office now screaming his guilt. The phone felt slippery in Julian's sweating palm as he sprinted down the executive corridor. He punched the speed dial for Sterling, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Pick up, he muttered, ignoring the startled stares of the employees he passed. Pick up the damn phone. When the line finally clicked open, Julian didn't wait for a greeting. Kill the lawsuit, he shouted, bursting through the doors of the HR department. Drop everything. Withdraw the filing. If one single process server knocks on her door, you are fired. Do you hear me, Sterling? Burn it all. He hung up without waiting for a confirmation and skidded to a halt in front of the main HR terminal. The office was empty, the staff likely at lunch or hiding from his earlier rampage. He didn't care. He jumped behind the desk and began typing furiously, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He needed an address. He needed to get to the Bronx before his mistake destroyed Nia's life completely. He typed her name into the employee database. Nia, enter. The screen blinked. User not found. Julian frowned. He typed it again, slower this time. Nia. Last name unknown. Search by department. Housekeeping. 0 results. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He tried the archived files. He tried the payroll history. Nothing. It was as if she had never existed. The screen stared back at him, blank and mocking. Then he saw the system log in the corner. Recent activity. User admin Camilla. Batch delete. Camilla. She hadn't just fired Nia. She had erased her. She had wiped every digital footprint Nia had ever made in this company to ensure there was no trail, no evidence, no way for him to bring her back. It was efficient. It was ruthless. And it was exactly what he deserved for trusting a shark. Julian slammed his hand against the desk, a roar of frustration tearing from his throat. He spun around, his eyes wild, searching the room for anything physical, anything paper that might have survived the digital purge. His eyes landed on the large blue recycling bin in the corner, overflowing with the morning's discarded documents. Without a second thought, the billionaire dropped to his knees. He didn't care about his Italian suit. He didn't care about the coffee stains on the carpet. He plunged his hands into the trash, tossing aside crumpled memos and empty sandwich wrappers. He dug through the refuse of his own empire, searching for the one thing he had treated like garbage only hours before. Paper cuts sliced his fingers. The smell of stale coffee filled his nose. He ripped through a stack of shredded financial reports, his heart pounding in his ears. "Please," he whispered, the word foreign on his lips. "Please let it be here." And then, near the bottom, stained with a ring of brown espresso, he saw it, a handwritten application form. The paper was cheap, the edges slightly torn. He pulled it out with trembling hands. The ink was faded, but legible. Nidia Rivera. There was a phone number and an address in the South Bronx. Julian clutched the paper to his chest like a holy relic. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the trash scattered across the pristine floor. He didn't call his driver. He didn't call security. He ran to the elevator, the piece of paper in his hand burning with the heat of his shame. He sprinted to the parking garage and threw himself into his sports car, the engine roaring to life with a ferocity that matched his own. He peeled out of the garage, tires screeching, heading north toward a part of the city he had spent his entire life avoiding, driving toward the only person who could save him from himself. Camilla stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse office, watching the tracking dot on her phone screen move rapidly north toward the Bronx. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water, her eyes cold and calculating. Julian was erratic and emotional, but he was not stupid. If he found the girl, and if the girl spoke, the game was over. The delete key on the server had been a temporary measure, but now she needed something permanent. She needed to murder Nia's reputation so thoroughly that even if Julian found her, he would look at her with disgust rather than regret. She picked up a second phone, a disposable burner she kept locked in her desk drawer, and dialed a number that did not exist in any official directory. The voice on the other end was rough and impatient. "It is time for the second phase," Camilla said, her voice smooth, like silk over steel. "The target is the apartment in the Bronx. I do not want a simple eviction. I want a crime scene. Make it look like a center of operations." She listened for a moment, then continued. "Plant the corporate blueprints we discussed. Put the stack of cash in the freezer. Hide the encrypted hard drives under the floorboards. When you are done, that apartment should not look like the home of a struggling maid. It should look like the safe house of a corporate spy. Destroy everything else. Make sure there is nothing innocent left." 40 minutes later, a black van screeched to a halt outside Nia's crumbling apartment building. 4 men stepped out dressed in heavy dark clothing. They did not knock. The front door of apartment 4B splintered inward with a deafening crash as a heavy boot slammed against the lock. The wood gave way and the men poured into the tiny living room like a tide of violence. They moved with terrifying efficiency. One man grabbed the few framed photos of Nia's family and smashed them against the wall, the glass shattering onto the worn carpet. Another took a knife to the small sofa, slicing the fabric open and stuffing envelopes filled with fake bank transfer records into the cushioning. They overturned the kitchen table and emptied the cupboards, throwing meager cans of food onto the floor. In the bedroom, the sound of the invasion woke Nia's mother. Her eyes fluttered open in terror as the men stormed in. They ignored the frail woman hooked up to the ventilator. One of the thugs pulled up the loose corner of the rug and placed a black metal briefcase underneath it. Inside were forged documents detailing the schematics of Julian's company, documents that would frame Nia as the architect of the hostile takeover. "Check the vents," the leader barked. Another man ripped the grate off the wall and shoved a bundle of high-tech listening devices inside. They were painting a picture of a mastermind, a woman who had infiltrated the billionaire's home not to clean, but to steal. They smashed the simple lamp on the nightstand and overturned the dresser, spilling Nia's humble clothes across the floor. The leader walked over to the small desk where Nia kept her bills. He swept them onto the floor and replaced them with a stack of passports, all with Nia's photo but different names. It was a masterpiece of deception. When Julian walked through that door, he would not see a victim. He would see a predator who had played him for a fool. The men finished their work, leaving the apartment in ruins, the air filled with dust and the silent, terrified gasps of the woman in the bed. They vanished as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind a lie waiting to be discovered. The rain hammered against the metal roof of the Greasy Spoon Diner in the darkest corner of the Bronx. It was 2 a.m. Inside the kitchen, the air smelled of stale grease and despair. Julian pushed through the back door, his Italian suit soaked through his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked wild. He looked nothing like a billionaire. He scanned the cramped, steam-filled room until his eyes landed on her. Nia was standing at a deep industrial sink, her arms submerged in gray, murky water up to her elbows. She was scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that spoke of survival, not pride. She looked thinner. Her uniform was stained, oversized, and ragged. When the door banged open, she flinched, her shoulders hunching up as if expecting a blow. She turned slowly. When she saw him, the color drained from her face, leaving her ashen. She took a step back, hitting the edge of the sink. Julian stumbled forward, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet tile. "Nia," he gasped, his voice ragged and desperate. "I found you. Oh God, I found you." He reached out a hand towards her, as if to pull her from the wreckage he had caused. "Please, you have to come with me. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." The sheikh walked out. "The company is crashing. I need you. I will give you anything, double your pay, triple it. Just please come back. I canceled the lawsuit. I did not mean for this to happen." Nia stared at him. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at his desperate face. She did not see a savior. She saw the man who had ordered security to throw her onto the street like trash. She saw the man whose lawyers had sent her a $5 million death threat. She saw the reason her landlord was banging on her door. The fear in her chest ignited into a white-hot rage. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She grabbed the plastic basin of dirty dishwater sitting on the counter. With a guttural cry of frustration, she heaved the contents straight at him. The cold, greasy water splashed over Julian's chest, soaking his shirt and dripping down his face. Bits of old food and gray suds clung to his lapel. He froze, blinking the sting from his eyes, water dripping from his nose. The room went dead silent save for the sound of the rain and the water dripping from his suit to the floor. "Get away from me!" Nia screamed, her voice breaking. "Do not touch me! Do not look at me! You think you can just walk in here and buy me back because you lost some money? You destroyed my life, Julian. My mother is dying and I'm scrubbing grease off plates because you decided I was worthless." Julian opened his mouth to apologize, to tell her about the mistake with the contract, but the look in her eyes stopped him cold. It was pure terror mixed with hatred. "Stay away from me," she hissed, backing up against the stainless steel counter, grabbing a heavy metal ladle like a weapon. "You and your people are poison. You only bring disaster. You bring lawsuits and pain and hunger. I do not want your money. I want you to leave me alone, or I swear I will scream until the police come. Go." Julian stood there, dripping wet and defeated in a kitchen that smelled of old oil, realizing that no amount of money could wash away the stain he had put on his own soul. He backed away slowly, leaving her in the steam and the filth alone. The flashing blue and red lights cut through the darkness of the Bronx street like a jagged knife slicing through the humid night air. Julian slammed the brakes of his car, his tires screeching against the wet pavement. He had followed the police cruiser, not knowing it was heading to the very address he had memorized from the trash bin. He scrambled out of the car, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The scene before him was chaos. Uniformed officers were swarming the entrance of the crumbling apartment building. The front door, which had already been damaged by the earlier break-in, now hung loosely on its hinges. Julian pushed past a barrier of curious neighbors, his breath catching in his throat. He saw her. 2 officers were dragging Nia out of the building. Her hands were cuffed behind her back and her face was a mask of sheer terror. She was screaming, but not for herself. She was screaming for her mother, left alone inside the wrecked apartment, hooked up to a machine that might fail without her. "Wait," Julian shouted, lunging forward. "Stop, what are you doing? She is innocent." A detective stepped in front of Julian, blocking his path with a heavy hand on his chest. "Back off, sir. This is an active crime scene. We received an anonymous tip regarding high-value theft from your estate." Julian froze. Theft. That was impossible. Nia had barely taken a bottle of water without asking. Before he could argue, another officer emerged from the dark hallway holding a battered canvas tote bag. It was the same bag Nia used to carry her change of clothes, the one she kept in the staff locker room. The officer upended the bag onto the hood of the squad car. Amidst the frayed fabric and worn-out shoes, a velvet pouch tumbled out. The officer pulled the drawstrings loose and spilled the contents. Diamonds. A cascade of glittering stones sparkled under the harsh streetlights. They were loose, uncut gems from Julian's private safe. Gems that only a handful of people knew existed. The air left Julian's lungs. He stared at the diamonds, his mind reeling. He knew those stones. He kept them in a hidden wall safe in the library. How could she have them? Nia saw the diamonds and her eyes went wide with horror. "I have never seen those before." She cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. "That is not mine. Someone put that there. Julian, please tell them. You know I didn't take anything." Julian looked at her. He looked at the tears streaming down her face, the raw honesty he thought he saw in her eyes. But then he looked at the diamonds. They were right there. Physical, undeniable proof. The doubt crept in like a poisonous fog. Had he been played? Was Camilla right all along? Was this impoverished struggles just a cover for a calculated thief? The detective looked at Julian. "Do you recognize this property, Mr. Thorne?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Nia, who was shaking her head violently, begging him with her eyes to believe her. But the evidence was staring him in the face. The diamonds were real. The bag was hers. "Yes," Julian whispered, his voice hollow and broken. "They are mine." That was all the police needed. They shoved Nia into the back of the patrol car. She slammed against the seat, sobbing helplessly, her eyes locked on Julian until the door slammed shut, severing the connection. Julian stood alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the flashing lights and the whispers of the crowd. He felt a sickness deep in his gut. He wanted to believe her, but the diamonds were there, glittering cruelly on the hood of the police car, mocking his confusion. He had come to save her, but instead he had just hammered the final nail into her coffin. He did not know who to trust anymore, and that uncertainty was tearing him apart. The holding cells smelled of bleach and old sweat, a sharp chemical odor that stung the back of the throat. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a sound that felt like it was drilling into Nia's skull. She sat on the cold metal bench, hugging her knees to her chest. Around her, other women sat in various states of despair or rage, but Nia felt nothing but a hollow, terrifying silence. She was alone. Truly alone. Julian had looked at her with doubt. The police looked at her with contempt. Her mother was alone in that wrecked apartment, and the thought made Nia's breath hitch in her throat. The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor clanged open. A corrections officer with a face carved from stone walked to the bars. "You get one call." The officer said, his voice bored and flat. "Make it count. You have 2 minutes." Nia stood up. Her legs trembled so badly she almost fell. She walked to the wall-mounted phone. She picked up the heavy receiver. It smelled of plastic and grime. She stared at the keypad. Who could she call? She had no money for a lawyer. Her neighbors were too scared to help. Julian was the reason she was here. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift back. Not to the cleaning cart or the uniform, but further back. Back to a reception hall in Geneva years ago when she was just an intern for the United Nations. She remembered a business card passed to her by a dignitary's aide, a number for emergencies, A number for the man who valued loyalty above all else. She punched the numbers in slowly. Her memory was her only weapon now. The area code was international. It was a long shot. It was impossible. But it was all she had. The line clicked and began to ring. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Please," she whispered, "please pick up." The line connected. There was a moment of silence, and then a deep, calm voice spoke. "This is a private line. Identify yourself." Nia gripped the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. She forced her voice to be steady. She forced herself to stand tall, even in this cage. "Your Excellency," she said clearly, "it is me, the woman from the boardroom. The maid who translated for you." There was a pause on the other end. A pause that lasted a lifetime. She could hear the faint sound of classical music in the background, a stark contrast to the shouting in the cell block. The translator, the Sheikh's voice, came back devoid of anger, now filled with curiosity. "You are the one who stopped me from signing. Why are you calling this number?" Nia took a deep breath. "I am in prison, Your Excellency. I have been framed for a crime I did not commit because I spoke the truth in that room. I have no one else. You spoke of honor when you left that building. You said you do not do business with men without integrity." She leaned her forehead against the cold concrete wall, tears finally spilling over. "Mr. Al-Fayed," she whispered, her voice breaking just a little. "I saved you billions. I saved your reputation. Now I am asking you to pay that debt. I need you to honor your word." The silence returned. Nia held her breath. Had she overstepped? Was she just a gnat to a giant? Then the Sheikh spoke. His voice was no longer curious. It was commanding. It was the voice of a man who moved mountains. "Tell me exactly where you are," he said. Nia told him the precinct number. "Do not say another word to the police," the Sheikh ordered. "Do not sign anything. I am sending my personal counsel. Sit tight. The debt is acknowledged." The line went dead. Nia hung up the phone. She walked back to the metal bench and sat down. For the first time since the handcuffs clicked shut, she did not feel afraid. She felt the cold steel of the bench, but inside she felt the warmth of a fire starting to burn. Help was coming, and it was coming with the force of a hurricane. The penthouse library was shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by the flickering orange glow of the gas fireplace. Julian sat on the Persian rug, his back against the heavy oak leg of the coffee table. He held his head in his hands, his mind replaying the image of Nia being shoved into the police car over and over again. The look of betrayal in her eyes haunted him. He felt like a man wandering through a fog, unable to distinguish between friend and foe. He shifted his weight, trying to find a comfortable position on the floor, and that was when he saw it. A small metallic object was wedged deep into the fibers of the rug, hidden in the darkness beneath the table. Julian reached out his fingers, brushing against cold, smooth metal. He pulled it free. It was a pen, but it was heavier than a normal writing instrument. He turned it over in his hand and recognized the small digital display on the side. It was a voice recorder pen. His breath caught in his throat. He remembered this pen. Nia used it to record her language lessons and her notes for her nursing studies. She must have dropped it the day she was dragged out by security. His thumb hovered over the small play button. If this pen had been recording during the meeting, or during the chaotic moments before she left, it might hold the truth. It might be the only unbiased witness left in his world. "What is that?" The voice was sharp and filled with panic. Julian looked up. Camilla stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes locked onto the silver device in his hand. She had entered silently, but now she moved with the speed of a striking cobra. "It is Nia's pen," Julian said, his voice raspy. "I think it might have recorded something." "Don't touch it!" Camilla shrieked, rushing across the room. Her composure, usually as hard as diamond, was cracking. She dropped to her knees beside him, clawing at his hand. "Give it to me, Julian. That is not a pen. It is a listening device. I told you she was a spy. She planted that bug to record your private conversations and sell them to your competitors." Julian pulled his arm back, confusion warring with the sudden violence of her reaction. That does not make sense, Camilla. Why would she leave it here if she was stealing secrets? I need to hear it. No, you don't, Camilla yelled. She lunged for him, her fingernails digging into his wrist. She was desperate, frantic. Do not listen to her lies. It is manipulated audio. It is a trap, Julian. Give it to me. They struggled on the floor of the luxury apartment. It was a clumsy, desperate fight. Julian tried to shield the device, but Camilla was fueled by a terrifying adrenaline. She yanked his arm with all her strength, her eyes wide with fear. She managed to pry his fingers loose. The pen slipped from his grasp. With a cry of triumph, Camilla snatched it from the air. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look at it. She turned and hurled the silver pen with all her might toward the roaring fireplace. No, Julian shouted, scrambling forward. The pen hit the back of the firebox with a metallic clink. It landed directly in the heart of the blue and orange flames. Julian reached out, but the heat was too intense. He watched in horror as the plastic casing began to bubble and warp instantly. The tiny screen turned black and melted. A small pop echoed as the battery exploded inside the casing, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "It is gone," Camilla panted, standing up and smoothing her skirt. Her chest was heaving, but her eyes were cold again. "I saved you, Julian. You do not understand now, but I saved you from her poison." She turned and walked out of the library, leaving Julian kneeling on the rug. He stared into the fire, watching the last remnants of the pen turn to ash. He felt a sickness rising in his gut. Camilla said she was protecting him, but as he watched the evidence burn, he realized he had never seen anyone look as terrified as she did when she saw that pen. He did not feel saved. He felt like he had just watched the truth burn to death. The courtroom was a cavern of polished mahogany and suffocating silence. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotone note that seemed to vibrate against Nia's ribs. She sat in the defendant's chair wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. The fabric scratched against her skin, but she refused to fidget. Her wrists were chafed from the handcuffs, yet she kept her hands folded calmly on the table. She looked small in the vast room, but her spine was a rod of steel. Across the aisle sat the prosecutor, a man hired by Camilla's legal team. He was a shark in a $3,000 suit, moving with the predatory grace of someone who enjoyed the scent of blood. He did not look at the judge. He looked only at Nia. His eyes were cold and devoid of empathy. He paced back and forth in front of the witness stand, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the floorboards like a ticking clock, counting down the minutes of Nia's freedom. "Your Honor." The lawyer began, his voice smooth and carrying to the back of the room without effort. "We are not dealing with a simple misunderstanding here. We are dealing with a calculated theft of massive proportions. This woman was invited into a home of prestige and trust. She was given an opportunity most people in her position would dream of. And how did she repay that kindness? She stole diamonds worth more than her entire lifetime of earnings." He stopped directly in front of Nia, leaning over the table until he was invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. He slammed a photograph of the diamonds onto the table. The glossy image showed the gems glittering on the hood of the police car. "Look at them, Ms. Rivera," he hissed. "You put these in your bag. You thought you could sell them on the black market and disappear. You thought you were smarter than everyone else. Admit it. Save the court's time. Confess now, and perhaps the judge will show mercy. If you continue this charade of innocence, you will rot in a cell until you are old and gray." Nia did not flinch. She stared at the photograph and then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. She did not speak. Her silence was not the silence of submission. It was a heavy, tangible force that filled the space between them. It was a wall he could not break. The lawyer's eyes narrowed. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper that only she and the jury could hear. "You have a sick mother, do you not? Who is paying for her ventilator right now while you sit here? Who is turning her over so she does not get bed sores? If you confess, I can make a deal. I can ensure she is cared for. But if you stay silent, you are killing her, just as surely as you stole those gems. Do you want her to die alone because of your stubborn pride?" That was the spark. Nia's eyes did not fill with tears. They filled with fire. a burning, intense heat that radiated from her soul. She looked at him with such profound loathing and unshakable truth that for a brief second the lawyer faltered. He took a step back, unsettled by the raw power radiating from the woman in chains. He had expected a broken maid begging for forgiveness. Instead, he found a warrior who was done bleeding. She did not say a word, but her eyes screamed a promise of retribution that made the air in the courtroom turn cold. She would not break. Not today. Not ever. The judge raised his gavel, ready to deliver a ruling that would seal Naya's fate. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt hard to breathe. The prosecutor stood tall, a smug grin plastering his face, believing he had broken the maid. Nia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, bracing for the end. Then the sound of thunder cracked through the room. It was not a storm outside. It was the double mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom being thrown open with such force that they slammed against the walls. The noise echoed like a gunshot, silencing every whisper and shuffle in the gallery. Every head turned in unison. A wall of men in black suits entered first, moving with military precision to line the center aisle. They were not local police. They were private security, and they carried an air of absolute authority. Behind them strode Sheikh Al-Fayed. He did not walk, he glided. He wore a pristine, dark suit that cost more than the courthouse building itself. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. He marched down the center of the room, his eyes locked on the prosecutor like a hawk sighting a mouse. "Who dares to accuse my senior advisor of theft?" The voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the floorboards tremble. The prosecutor blinked, stumbling back a step. "Your Honor," he stammered. "Who is this man?" "Order in the court." "I am the order," the sheikh announced, stopping at the gate that separated the gallery from the bench. He looked up at the judge with a gaze that demanded submission. "I am Sheikh Al-Fayed, and the woman you have shackled in that chair is not a common thief. She is the newly appointed senior strategic advisor to the Al-Fayed Royal Consortium." A collective gasp swept through the room. Julian, who had been sitting in the back with his head in his hands, looked up in shock. Advisor. He had called her a maid. He had called her nothing. The sheikh continued, his voice dripping with disdain as he pointed a finger at the prosecutor. "You accuse this woman of stealing loose diamonds. That is an insult to her station and to me. Why would a woman who manages international contracts worth billions bother with trinkets from a failing businessman?" He turned his gaze to Nia. His expression softened for a fraction of a second, a silent message of reassurance before hardening again as he addressed the judge. "I am here to post her bail. Name the amount. I do not care if it is 1 million or 10 million. I have brought a certified bank draft. She leaves with me. Now." The prosecutor tried to protest. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. She is a flight risk. She is a diplomat," the sheikh cut him off. "And she is under my personal protection. If you wish to keep her in these chains, you will have to explain to the State Department why you are detaining a high-ranking official of a foreign delegation without cause." The judge looked at the sheikh, then at the terrified prosecutor, and finally at Nia, who sat stunned in her orange jumpsuit. The power dynamic in the room had shifted violently. The law was powerful, but international money and diplomatic pressure were a force of nature. "Bail is set at $500,000, the judge said, his voice wavering slightly. The sheikh snapped his fingers. One of his aides stepped forward and placed a check on the judge's bench. It was already written. "Done," the sheikh said. "Unshackle her." The bailiff moved quickly, fumbling with the keys. The metal cuffs clicked open and fell away. Naya rubbed her wrists, looking up at the man who had flown across the world to save her. She stood up, her legs shaking but her head high. The sheikh offered her his arm, not as a savior to a victim, but as an equal to an equal. She took it. As they walked out of the courtroom past the stunned silence of the gallery, Nia did not look back at the lawyer or the judge. She looked only at the open doors ahead. The changing room in the precinct holding area was small and smelled of industrial cleaner. But to Nia it felt like a cocoon of transformation. On the metal bench sat a sleek black box embossed with the royal seal of the Al-Fayed family. Inside lay a tailored cream-colored power suit made of silk and wool, along with a pair of heels that looked like weapons of war. Nia shed the oversized orange jumpsuit, letting it fall to the concrete floor like a dead skin. She dressed slowly. The fabric felt cool and expensive against her skin. When she buttoned the jacket, she did not just look like a different person. She felt like one. The maid who had scrubbed floors was gone. The woman who stared back from the cracked mirror was a force of nature. She walked out of the precinct doors into the blinding flash of camera bulbs. The press had gathered hungry for the story of the maid accused of stealing millions. But they did not see a criminal. They saw a queen. The Sheikh's black limousine waited at the curb, its engine purring like a large cat. Nia, wait. The voice was desperate and broken. Nia stopped on the second step. She did not turn immediately. She let the silence stretch, let the cameras click, let the moment hang in the air. Then she turned her head slowly. Julian pushed through the line of reporters. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. His tie was undone, his eyes were bloodshot, and his face was pale with exhaustion and guilt. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her. The distance between them was only a few feet, but it felt like an ocean. "I am so sorry," Julian choked out, reaching a hand toward her, but dropping it when he saw the look in her eyes. "I did not know. The diamonds were in your bag. It looked so real. I was confused. I was scared. Please, Nia, let me fix this. Let me hire the best lawyers. Let me make it right." Nia looked down at him. Her expression was not angry. It was not sad. It was completely, entirely indifferent. It was the look one gives to a stranger who has bumped into them on the street. "You had your chance to fix it, Julian," she said, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd, clear and sharp as a bell. "You had a choice between trusting the woman who saved your company and trusting the evidence planted by a snake. You chose the snake because deep down you still saw me as the help. You thought a maid was capable of theft because you never truly believed I was capable of honor. Nia, please." Julian begged, tears welling in his eyes. "I know I was wrong." "We are not done, Julian." She cut him off, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "You think this is over because I am out of jail? No. This is just the beginning. I am not going to run and hide. I am going to find the person who put those diamonds in my bag. I am going to find the person who deleted my records. I am going to expose the rot in your empire, and I will prove to the world who the real thief is." She turned her back on him. The movement was final. She walked down the steps and slid into the back of the limousine. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her in a world of luxury and silence. Through the tinted glass, she watched Julian standing alone on the sidewalk, broken and small, as the car pulled away into the city traffic, leaving him behind in the dust of his own making. The suite in the luxury hotel was silent, save for the hum of the high-speed air conditioning. Nia sat at the glass desk with a single object in front of her. It was an old tablet with a cracked screen and a rose gold casing that was scratched at the edges. It looked like a piece of junk in such an expensive room, but to Nia, it was the deadliest weapon in her arsenal. Camilla had thrown this tablet at her 6 months ago during a tantrum about a wrinkled dress. She had told Nia to take the trash out and keep it if she wanted to learn how to read something other than a mop bucket. Camilla thought she was being cruel. She thought she was asserting her dominance over a servant who could barely afford bus fare. She never imagined that she was handing over the keys to her own destruction. Nia plugged the device into the charger. The battery icon flashed red, then turned green. She pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, revealing a background photo of Camilla smiling on a yacht in Monaco. Nia held her breath as the Wi-Fi connected. She waited for the inevitable password prompt or the biometric lock screen, but it never came. The home screen loaded instantly, the apps refreshed, the email client pinged with new notifications. Camilla, in her infinite arrogance, had never wiped the device. She had never logged out of her cloud account. She assumed that a maid would not know what a cloud was, let alone how to access it. She assumed Nia was too simple to be a threat. Nia's fingers moved across the cracked glass with the speed and precision of the intelligence operative she used to be. She bypassed the photo gallery filled with vanity shots and went straight to the file management system. She needed documents. She needed logs. She needed the digital paper trail that people like Camilla always left behind because they believed they were untouchable. She opened the cloud drive. It was a labyrinth of folders, expenses, galas, Julian. Nia tapped the folder with Julian's name. Inside were subfolders labeled with dates. She scrolled to the date of the contract negotiation. There were drafts of the contract emails between Camilla and a linguist in Beirut, and a memo titled Clause 14B Strategy. Nia opened the memo. It was a detailed breakdown of how to hide the hostile takeover language within the Arabic text, ensuring Julian would sign away his rights without noticing. It was proof of premeditated sabotage. But Nia needed more. She needed to clear her name. She navigated to a folder marked Insurance. Inside were video files. She clicked on the most recent one dated the morning of the raid. The video player opened. The footage was grainy, taken from a hidden nanny cam in the staff locker room. Nia watched in silence as the timestamp counted up. The room was empty. Then the door opened. Camilla walked in. She looked around nervously, checking the hallway. She walked straight to Nia's locker. She pulled a master key from her pocket and opened the metal door. From her clutch purse, she removed a velvet pouch. The diamonds. She stuffed the pouch deep into Nia's canvas tote bag buried under a spare uniform. She closed the locker, wiped the handle with a handkerchief, and left. Nia sat back in her chair. The air left her lungs in a long, slow exhale. She had it. She had the video. She had the contract emails. She had the receipts for the thugs who destroyed her apartment. She connected an external hard drive to the tablet and hit copy. The progress bar began to fill, moving from left to right. It was not just data transferring. It was justice. It was vindication. It was the end of Camilla Vance. Nia watched the green bar reach 100%, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to smile. The predator had become the prey. The digital archive was a sprawling web of vanity and deception, but Nia navigated it with the cold precision of a surgeon. She had the video of the theft. That was enough to clear her name. That was enough to send Camilla to prison for planting evidence. But Nia was not looking for a simple victory. She was looking for the root of the rot. She wanted to know why. Why destroy a maid? Why risk everything for a few diamonds? It felt too small for a woman with Camilla's appetite. She dug deeper into the deleted items folder. People like Camilla were arrogant. They believed that hitting delete made sins disappear forever. They did not understand that data never truly dies. It just waits in the dark to be found. Nia scrolled past hundreds of emails about floral arrangements for the wedding and dress fittings in Paris. And then she saw it. An email thread with a subject line that stood out because it was devoid of the usual fluff. It was titled simply, Project Siphon. The recipient was not a wedding planner or a jewelry designer. The email address belonged to Marcus Sterling, not Julian's lawyer, but the CEO of Sterling Global, Julian's fiercest competitor in the tech sector. The man who had been trying to buy Julian out for years. Nia clicked the email. The timestamp was dated 2 days before the disastrous meeting with the sheikh. The text was short, brutal, and incriminating. Has the idiot signed the contract yet? Nia read the words again, her breath hitching. The idiot. She meant Julian. The man she was supposed to marry. The man she claimed to protect. Nia scrolled down to the body of the message. It continued with a cold, calculated efficiency that made Nia's blood run cold. I have ensured the translation team is compromised. The hostile takeover clause 14B is buried in the Arabic text, just as we discussed. He will not read it. He trusts me. Once he signs with the sheikh, he will unknowingly sign over majority control to the holding company you set up. The moment the ink is dry, his empire is yours. And then the final line, the smoking gun that turned a domestic squabble into a federal crime. Transfer the $10 million to the Swiss account immediately upon confirmation of signature. I am tired of playing the doting fiancé to a man who is too stupid to see he is already dead. Nia sat back in the expensive leather chair, the glow of the tablet illuminating her face. It was not just about the maid. It was never about the maid. Nia was just collateral damage, a nuisance who had accidentally stumbled upon a corporate assassination. Camilla was not protecting Julian from a spy. Camilla was the spy. She had sold Julian out for $10 million. She was going to bankrupt him, strip him of his legacy, and hand his life's work over to his worst enemy while smiling at him across the dinner table. Nia looked at the screen. She felt a strange pang of pity for Julian. He was arrogant and blind, yes, but he was being slaughtered by the person he slept next to. He had no idea that the woman he was defending was holding the knife to his throat. Nia saved the email to the hard drive. She had the diamonds. She had the video. And now she had the motive. She had everything she needed, not just to clear her name, but to burn Camilla's world to the ground. The penthouse was submerged in a heavy silence, broken only by the aggressive hiss of the shower in the master bathroom. Julian was trying to wash away the grime of the last 24 hours, scrubbing his skin until it was raw, but the feeling of dirt remained under the surface. He had left his phone on the marble island in the kitchen, a careless mistake born of pure exhaustion. The screen lit up with a sudden sharp vibration that buzzed against the stone. Camilla was standing by the window, staring out at the city she planned to own. She heard the noise. She turned her head slowly, her movements fluid and predatory. She walked to the counter. The phone buzzed again, a persistent demand for attention. She looked at the screen. The notification was a preview of a text message from a number Julian had not saved, but Camilla recognized it instantly. She had memorized it from the personnel files she had destroyed. It was Nia. She swiped the screen, unlocking the phone with the passcode she had watched Julian enter 1,000 times. The message opened. "Meet me at the old boardroom, the one on the 42nd floor. Right now. Do not tell Camilla." Camilla stared at the words, her lips curling into a sneer. Nia was out. The little maid had somehow escaped the cage Camilla had built for her, and she was bold. She was not running for the border or hiding in a hole. She was summoning Julian. She was trying to turn him. She was trying to tell him the truth. Camilla looked towards the bathroom. The water was still running. Julian had not heard a thing. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. If Julian saw this, he would run to her. He was weak. He was desperate for absolution. He would believe whatever sob story the maid spun for him. Camilla could not allow that. She pressed delete. The message vanished from the inbox as if it had never been sent. She placed the phone back, exactly where it had been, the screen dark and silent. She walked to the hall closet where she kept her long trench coat. She slipped it on, knotting the belt tight around her waist. Then she reached for her purse. It was a delicate designer bag costing more than Nia used to make in a year. She reached inside past the silk scarf and the leather wallet. Her fingers closed around the cold, hard steel of a compact pistol. It was a .22 caliber semi-automatic, small enough to hide in a palm but lethal at close range. She had bought it years ago for insurance. Today, she would cash that policy in. She checked the chamber. Loaded. She slipped the gun into the deep pocket of her coat, her hand resting on the grip. She checked her reflection in the mirror by the door. She looked calm. She looked composed. She looked like a woman going out for a late-night stroll. She opened the front door and stepped out into the hallway. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the garage. Nia wanted a meeting. She wanted a confrontation in the old boardroom where the shadows were deep and the soundproofing was excellent. Camilla smiled as the doors closed. She would give the maid exactly what she asked for. She would meet her. And she would make sure it was the last meeting Nia ever attended. The storm outside battered the glass walls of the 42nd floor, creating a chaotic symphony of wind and rain that matched the turmoil inside the room. The old boardroom was a cavern of shadows, illuminated only by the jagged flashes of lightning that tore through the sky. Julian stood at the head of the table, looking like a ghost in his expensive suit. He was waiting. He was hoping for an explanation that would make sense of the madness. The heavy double doors creaked open. Nia walked in. She did not look at Julian with pity. She looked at him with the cold, hard stare of a judge delivering a verdict. She carried a thick stack of papers in her hand. They were not neat. They were not bound. They were raw printouts of the digital betrayal she had unearthed. Nia did not say a word. She marched to the center of the room and threw the stack of papers onto the polished mahogany table. The sound of the heavy pile hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. The papers slid across the surface, stopping inches from Julian's trembling hands. "Read it," Nia commanded, her voice cutting through the sound of the thunder. "Read what your future wife thinks of you." Julian looked down. The top page was the email to his rival. The subject line stared back at him. Project Siphon. His eyes scanned the text. He read the insults. He read the plan to bankrupt him. He read the words, "the idiot used to describe the man who had given Camilla everything." His face crumbled. The denial that had shielded him for days finally shattered into dust. "So it is true," Julian whispered, his voice breaking. A slow clap emerged from the darkest corner of the room. Julian spun around. Nia tensed her muscles, ready for a fight. Camilla stepped out of the shadows. She was still wearing her trench coat, the belt knotted tight around her waist like a corset. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was flawless. But her eyes were wild, manic, and terrifying. She looked from Julian to the papers and then to Nia. A smile spread across her face, but it was not the charming smile of a socialite. It was the baring of teeth by a predator who had been cornered. "Bravo, Camilla," said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The maid figured it out. I suppose I should be impressed. You are smarter than you look, Nia." Julian took a step toward her, his hands shaking with rage. "How could you? I loved you. I trusted you with my life." Camilla laughed. It was a high, shrill sound that made the hair on Nia's arms stand up. She reached into the deep pocket of her coat. Her hand came out holding the small black pistol. She leveled it at Julian's chest. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of pure, cold malice. "You trusted me because you are weak, Julian. That is why I did it. Yes, I sold you out. Yes, I planted the diamonds, because you are too stupid to run this empire. You are soft. You let servants talk back to you. You let emotions dictate business. You do not deserve this power." She cocked the gun, the metallic click echoing loudly in the room. "I did not do this for hate." Camilla hissed, her finger tightening on the trigger. "I did it for $10 million. And now I am going to finish it." The barrel of the small black pistol did not waver, but the silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a trap snapping shut. Nia did not back away from the weapon. She stood her ground, her eyes locking onto Camilla with a look of absolute pity that was far more cutting than anger. "You think you are a genius," Camilla, Nia said, her voice calm and level, rising above the sound of the storm outside. "You think you destroyed the evidence in the library. You think you watched my only lifeline melt in the fireplace." Camilla sneered, her finger twitching on the trigger. "I did destroy it. I watched it burn. You are bluffing. You have nothing left but a stack of emails that you could have forged." Nia reached into her pocket slowly so as not to provoke a shot. She pulled out her phone. The screen glowed bright in the dim room, illuminating her face. "You burned a $3 ballpoint pen I took from the reception desk," Nia said. "I knew you would search the library. I knew you would react with violence because you are predictable. You saw what you wanted to see. You saw a threat and you tried to burn it. But intelligence is not about reacting, Camilla. It is about anticipating." Nia tapped the screen of her phone. A small icon of a sound file appeared. The reel recorder was not on the rug. Nia continued, her voice cold. "It was taped underneath the seat of your vanity chair in the master bedroom. I put it there this morning while you were busy admiring yourself in the mirror. I knew you would go there to gloat. I knew you would feel safe enough to speak your mind when you thought no one was listening." Camilla's eyes went wide. For the first time, the gun lowered just an inch. "No," she whispered. "That is a lie." Nia pressed play. The sound that filled the boardroom was crystal clear. It was not the static-filled audio of a cheap bug. It was high-definition digital quality. And the voice that echoed off the glass walls was unmistakably Camilla's. "Julian is a pathetic child." The recording played the voice dripping with venom and arrogance. The audio was from earlier that day, a conversation Camilla had on the phone while applying her makeup. "He actually thinks I love him. He looks at me like a puppy waiting for a treat. It is almost sad how easy it was to trick him." Julian flinched as if he had been slapped. He stared at the phone in Nia's hand, his face draining of all color. The recording continued. "Once the 10 million clears, I am going to dump him so fast his head will spin. I will take the money. I will take the apartment, and I will leave him with nothing but a bankrupt company and a broken heart. He is too stupid to run an empire anyway. He deserves to lose it." The voice on the recording laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that mirrored the woman standing with the gun. Nia hit pause. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Camilla stood frozen. The audio file was not just evidence of a crime. It was a mirror, showing her true, ugly soul to the man she was trying to kill. She looked at Julian expecting to see fear. Instead, she saw something far worse. She saw the absolute death of love. "You said I was stupid," Julian said, his voice quiet and deadly. "You were right. I was stupid to trust you. But I am not stupid enough to let you walk away from this." The power in the room had shifted completely. The gun was still in Camilla's hand, but it felt heavy and useless. The truth was out loud and undeniable, hanging in the air like smoke. She had not burned the evidence. She had spoken it into existence, and Nia had caught every single word. The silence in the boardroom shattered the moment Camilla's finger tightened on the trigger. She did not look at Julian anymore. Her eyes were fixed on Nia, burning with a hatred so pure it felt like heat radiating across the room. She screamed a sound that was less human and more like a tearing of metal, and leveled the barrel of the gun directly at Nia's chest. Julian did not think. He did not calculate the odds or hesitate for a fraction of a second. He moved on pure instinct, fueled by a tidal wave of guilt and adrenaline. He lunged across the short distance between them, crashing into Camilla just as the gun went off. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, a thunderclap that rang in their ears. The bullet missed Nia by inches, burying itself in the plaster of the wall with a puff of white dust. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. Camilla fought with the desperate strength of a person who knows their life is over. She clawed at Julian's face, her nails digging into his skin, screaming obscenities. She tried to bring the gun around for a second shot, but Julian gripped her wrist with both hands, forcing it down against the carpet. He was done being passive. He was done being the victim. He wrenched her arm back until she cried out in pain and her fingers spasmed. The small black pistol slipped from her grip and slid across the floor, binning until it came to a rest at Nia's feet. Before Camilla could scramble after it, the heavy double doors of the boardroom burst open with enough force to crack the wood. Nia had not come alone. She had forwarded the live audio stream to the detective the moment she started the recording. Police officers in tactical gear swarmed the room, their voices booming over the sound of the storm outside. "Get down, hands behind your back." The room was instantly filled with the chaotic energy of a raid. 2 officers pulled Julian away, while 2 others grabbed Camilla, pinning her to the ground. She thrashed against the weight of the officers, her expensive trench coat twisting and tearing. "Get off me!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and breaking. "Do you know who I am? You cannot do this. I am Camilla Vance. I will have your badges. I will ruin you." The click of the handcuffs was the only answer she got. "There is only you and the consequences of what you did. Take her away." The officers dragged her toward the door. She kicked and screamed, her heels scraping uselessly against the polished floor, leaving black scuff marks on the wood. Her wails echoed down the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until the elevator doors dinged and slid shut, cutting off the noise like a knife. The room fell silent, leaving Julian and Nia standing alone in the wreckage of the night, breathing hard and alive. The chaos of the arrest had faded, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the storm outside. The police were gone. Camilla was gone. The boardroom was a wreckage of scattered papers and shattered illusions. Julian stood in the center of the room, his expensive suit rumpled and covered in dust, his face scratched and pale. He felt hollowed out, as if the adrenaline that had fueled him moments ago had drained away, leaving only a cold, aching void where his heart used to be. He looked at Nia. She stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. She was still wearing the cream-colored suit the sheikh had sent, but she looked weary. There were red marks on her wrists where the handcuffs had dug into her skin during her arrest. Handcuffs that he had allowed, handcuffs that he had practically demanded. The sight of those bruises hit Julian harder than any physical blow. They were brands of his failure. He took a step toward her, but his legs would not hold him. The weight of his guilt was a physical thing, a crushing burden that pressed down on his shoulders until he could no longer stand. He crumpled. He did not sit. He did not lean. He dropped to his knees on the hard wooden floor. The sound of his knees hitting the ground echoed in the empty room, but he did not feel the pain. He felt only the burning acid of shame. Nia turned around at the sound. She looked down at him, her expression unreadable. She did not rush to help him up. She did not offer comfort. She simply watched him. Julian looked up at her, his vision blurring as hot tears spilled over his eyelids and tracked through the dust on his cheeks. He had never cried in front of anyone since he was a child, but he could not stop it now. The dam had broken. "I am so sorry," he choked out, his voice ragged and broken. The words felt small and useless against the mountain of his sins, but he had to say them. "I was so blind, Nia. I looked at the world through a lens of arrogance and I missed everything that mattered. I looked at Camilla, and I saw a partner. I saw a future. I saw royalty, but I was looking at a monster in a designer dress. I was in love with a demon who wanted to bleed me dry." He reached out a trembling hand toward the hem of her jacket, but he did not dare touch her. He pulled his hand back, curling it into a fist against his chest. "And then there was you. I looked at you and I saw nothing. I saw a uniform. I saw a servant. I saw someone to be used and discarded. But you were the only real thing in my life. You were the angel standing in the dirt trying to save a man who was busy digging his own grave. I trampled you, Nia. You tried to warn me and I crushed you for it. I sent you to prison while I protected the woman who was holding the knife to my throat." He bowed his head, his forehead nearly touching the floor, his shoulders shaking with the force of his sobs. The realization was a poison in his blood. He had wealth. He had power. He had influence. But in the face of true character, he was a pauper. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass, and he had almost destroyed the diamond in the process. "I do not expect you to forgive me," Julian whispered into the floorboards, his voice thick with grief. "I do not deserve forgiveness. I do not deserve to be in the same room as you. I am a fool, Nia. A blind, arrogant fool who broke the only person who ever actually gave a damn about him without asking for a single penny in return." He stayed there, kneeling in the wreckage of his ego, waiting for her judgment, knowing that whatever she said, whatever punishment she delivered, it would be less than what he deserved. He was a king who had fallen, and for the first time, he understood that he had never really been wearing a crown at all. The aftermath of the storm was not peace, but a sterile, cold dissection of a life built on lies. In the federal detention center, Camilla sat across from a public defender who looked too young and too tired to save her. The list of charges was not just a document, it was a tombstone. Conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, grand larceny, attempted murder with a deadly weapon, wire fraud. The evidence provided by Nia wasn't just substantial, it was overwhelming. The district attorney was not looking for a plea deal. He was looking to make an example of the socialite who thought she was above the law. 20 years. The words hung in the damp air of the interrogation room like a physical weight. Camilla stared at the scratched metal table. Her designer clothes had been bagged and tagged, replaced by the rough fabric of prison-issue gray. She was no longer the queen of New York society. She was inmate number 492. She realized with a sick lurch of her stomach that she would be middle-aged before she ever saw the inside of a salon again. The diamonds she had planted, the emails she had sent, the gun she had drawn, every single calculated move had become a bar in the cage she had built for herself. She screamed internally, but on the outside she was frozen, a statue of ruined ambition. Across the city, the judgment was different but just as brutal. Julian stood at the head of the long mahogany table in the boardroom. The physical mess from the night before had been cleaned, but the stain on his reputation was indelible. 12 pairs of eyes stared at him. These were not friends. They were sharks in bespoke suits, and they smelled blood. The chairman of the board, a man Julian had once considered a mentor, threw a file onto the table. It made a sharp slapping sound that echoed in the silence. "You allowed a corporate spy into your bed and into our servers," the chairman said, his voice ice cold. "You authorized security clearances for a woman who is actively selling us to Sterling Global. This is not just a romantic failure, Julian. This is gross negligence. We have lost consumer confidence. Our stock dipped 12 points this morning. The board is moving for a vote of no confidence. We believe you are unfit to lead." Julian did not argue. He did not shout or pound the table. The old Julian would have fired them all. The new Julian, the one who had knelt on the floor in front of a maid, simply nodded. He looked at the faces of the people he had made rich. "I was negligent," he admitted, his voice steady but quiet. "I was blinded by vanity. I almost lost this company because I was looking at the wrong things. But I am the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. I am the only one who can undo the damage Sterling caused, because I know his playbook now." The vote was agonizingly slow, hands raised one by one. It was a split decision. By a single vote, Julian kept his title. He was still the CEO, but the power was gone. He was on probation in his own empire. He walked out of the meeting not with a strut, but with the heavy gait of a man who had survived a firing squad only to realize he still had to clean up the blood. He had kept his chair, but he had lost his dignity. The heavy silence that followed the vote was suffocating. Julian sat at the head of the table, a captain who had lashed himself to a sinking ship. The board members were gathering their papers, their expressions cold and dismissive, preparing to leave him to clean up the wreckage of his own legacy. They smelled blood, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they finished what they started. The air was thick with the scent of corporate betrayal. Then the double doors swung open. It was not security. It was not a secretary. It was Nia. She walked into the room with a stride that commanded immediate attention. She was no longer wearing the oversized uniform of a servant nor the orange jumpsuit of a prisoner. She was dressed in a sharp-tailored business suit that screamed authority. She carried a leather portfolio tucked under her arm, and her eyes swept the room with a cool, detached confidence. The chairman frowned. "Who let this woman in? Security, remove her." "Sit down," Nia said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a gravity that made the chairman freeze halfway out of his chair. "I am not here to clean your floors. I am here representing the Al Fayed Royal Consortium." A ripple of shock went through the room. The sheikh, the man who had walked out, the man whose departure had triggered this financial freefall. Nia walked to the other end of the table, standing opposite Julian. She placed her portfolio on the mahogany surface and opened it, revealing a single document bearing the royal seal. "Sheikh Al Fayed has monitored the situation closely." She began addressing the board while keeping her eyes on Julian. "He knows that your stock has plummeted. He knows that your liquidity is drying up. He knows that without an immediate injection of capital, this company will be insolvent by the end of the quarter. You are looking for a lifeline. I am here to offer it." The room was deadly silent. The sharks were listening. "The consortium is prepared to inject $200 million into this company immediately," Nia announced. "We will stabilize the stock. We will honor the original partnership agreement. We will save you from the ruin that Sterling Global has planned for you." The chairman looked like he might faint from relief. He smiled a greedy, oil-slick smile. "That is incredibly generous. We accept, of course. We will prepare the transition of leadership immediately. There is one condition." Nia cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "The investment is contingent upon one non-negotiable clause. Julian Thorne remains as CEO." Julian looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. The board members exchanged confused glances. Why, the chairman sputtered. "He is a liability. He was negligent, because he is the only man in this room who has learned the cost of arrogance." Nia said, her voice softening just enough for the truth to shine through. He made a mistake, a terrible, massive mistake. But he paid for it, with his pride. He knelt on the floor and admitted he was wrong. A man who has lost everything and survived is far more dangerous and far more valuable than a man who has never failed. He has learned the hardest lesson of leadership. He has learned humility. She looked directly at Julian. The sheikh invests in character, not just profit. Julian has been broken, but he rebuilt himself with the truth. That is the asset we are buying. Take the deal with him or sink without him. The choice is yours. The smell of antiseptic was sharp and aggressive, hitting Julian the moment the automatic doors slid open. He walked into the lobby of the Bronx Public Hospital wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the annual budget of the triage unit. He felt the eyes of the people in the waiting room tracking him. They looked at him with suspicion and exhaustion. He kept his head down, clutching a small slip of paper with a patient ID number on it. He was not here to be a CEO. He was here to pay a debt that could not be calculated in stock options. He found the billing department tucked away behind a glass partition. The woman behind the desk looked tired, her eyes rimmed with red. She stared at Julian as he approached. He slid his black credit card under the glass, along with the piece of paper. "I want to pay the full balance for this patient," he said, his voice low and steady. "Every single cent, past, present, and future." The woman typed the number into her computer. Her eyes widened as the outstanding balance flashed on the screen. It was a staggering amount for a family living paycheck to paycheck. But for Julian, it was a rounding error. It made his stomach turn to think that this number, this digital figure on a screen, was the thing that had been crushing Nia's life while he was sipping scotch in his penthouse. He authorized the transaction without blinking. "I want to make a transfer," Julian added before the clerk could hand back his card. "I have arranged for a private transfer to the Mount Sinai VIP wing. I want her mother moved within the hour. I want the best specialists you have. I want 24-hour nursing care. I want her to wake up in a room that smells like fresh lilies and has a view of the river, not a brick wall." The clerk stammered, trying to process the request, but Julian's expression brokered no argument. He signed the papers with a heavy hand. "There is one condition," Julian said, leaning in close to the glass. "Do not tell her who paid for this. Tell her it was an anonymous donor. Tell her it was a clerical miracle. Tell her anything you want, but do not mention my name. If she knows it came from me, she might refuse it out of pride, and I cannot let that happen." After the paperwork was finalized, Julian walked up to the 4th floor. He moved silently down the linoleum corridor, his heart pounding in his ears. He stopped at the end of the hallway just out of sight of the nurse's station. He peered around the corner into room 402. Nia was there. She was asleep in a hard plastic chair, her body curled into an uncomfortable ball. Her head rested on the edge of the bed where her mother lay hooked up to the ventilator. She looked exhausted. She looked small. Julian raised his hand toward the open door, wanting to walk in and wake her. He wanted to tell her that she didn't have to worry about money ever again. He wanted to see the relief in her eyes, but he stopped himself. He remembered the look on her face when the police dragged her away. He remembered the diamonds on the hood of the car. He had no right to intrude on her vulnerability. He had no right to try and buy his way back into her good graces. He was not the hero of this story. He was just the man with the checkbook trying to clean up the mess he had helped create. He watched her for a long minute, memorizing the curve of her tired shoulders and the fierce love evident even in her sleep. Then he turned around and walked away, disappearing into the elevator before she could wake up and see the ghost of the man who had failed her. The taxi came to a halt in front of the old diner in the Bronx. Nia hesitated before opening the door. She expected the smell of stale grease and the sound of shouting cooks. Instead, she stepped onto a sidewalk that had been swept clean. The windows of the diner, usually obscured by layers of grime, were now crystal clear, revealing a warm, inviting glow from within. Julian had not just reserved a table. He had transformed the entire reality of the place. She walked inside. The sticky linoleum floors were gone, replaced by polished wood. The cracked vinyl booths had been reupholstered in soft velvet. In the center of the room sat a single table set for two with white linen and simple candlelight. Julian stood there waiting. He was not wearing the armor of his expensive suits. He wore a simple white shirt and dark trousers. He looked vulnerable. "I bought the building," Julian said softly, as she approached. "I could not let this place remain a memory of your humiliation. I wanted to turn the site of your lowest moment into the foundation of something new." Nia sat down. She looked at him, searching for the arrogance that used to define him. But it was gone, burned away by the fires of the last few weeks. "The company is safe." Julian continued, taking a seat opposite her. "The Sheikh's investment has stabilized the stock. But money cannot buy vision, and it cannot buy a conscience. I have the capital now, but I do not have the moral compass. That left with you. I cannot run this company alone, Nia. I do not want to be a king surrounded by yes-men anymore. I want a partner who will tell me when I'm wrong. I want you to be my vice president." Nia stared at him, stunned by the offer. But Julian was not finished. He reached into his pocket. Nia flinched instinctively, her mind flashing back to the velvet pouch of diamonds that had nearly destroyed her life. Julian saw the fear in her eyes and stopped, moving his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I know what you were thinking," he whispered. "I know that diamonds almost cost you your freedom. I swore I would never bring another jewel into your life that carried the weight of a lie." He placed a small wooden box on the table. It was not flashy. He opened it. Inside sat a simple, unadorned band of pure gold. It was modest, timeless, and real. "This is not a bribe," Julian said, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is a question. I have spent my life chasing things that sparkle, and I almost lost the only thing that shines. I do not want to be your boss. I want to be the man who spends the rest of his life trying to make up for the pain he caused you. Marry me, Nia, not for the billionaire, but for the man who finally learned how to see you." The diner was silent, save for the soft flicker of the candle. Nia looked at the ring, then at the man who had torn her world apart, and then rebuilt it brick by brick. She saw the regret etched into his face and the hope shining in his eyes. The simple gold band sat on the white tablecloth, glowing softly in the candlelight. It was a beautiful object, devoid of the pretension that had nearly destroyed them both. It was a promise of a new beginning. But as Nia looked at the ring, she felt a heaviness settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the metal, and everything to do with the man holding it. Julian watched her, his breath held, waiting for the happy ending he thought he had earned. He had done the work. He had apologized. He had paid the debts. He thought that was enough. Nia reached out. Her hand was steady. She did not pick up the ring. Instead, she placed her fingers on the lid of the small wooden box and closed it with a soft, final click. She slid the box back across the table until it rested in front of Julian. The sound of the wood sliding against the linen was the only noise in the room. Julian's face fell. The light in his eyes shattered, replaced by a raw confusion that made him look younger than his years. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask why, but Nia held up a hand to stop him. "I cannot marry you, Julian," she said, her voice gentle but immovable as a mountain. "Not now. Not like this. You are trying to fast forward through the healing. You are trying to skip the hard part where you have to live with yourself. You think a ring fixes the broken trust. You think a marriage erases the fact that you looked at me and saw a thief." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his, ensuring he heard every word. "If I say yes today, I will always be the maid you rescued. I will always be the woman you saved from the mess you created. I do not want to be saved, Julian. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. I need to know that when I walk into a room, people respect me for my mind and my work, not because I'm wearing your ring. I need to build my own empire before I can think about sharing yours. I cannot live in your shadow anymore. I need to find my own light." Julian stared at the closed box. He looked at his hands, the hands that had destroyed so much and tried so hard to fix it. He realized then that he was still trying to buy his way out of guilt. He was using marriage as another form of currency. "You are right," he whispered, his voice thick with a painful acceptance. "I am still the man who doubted you. I have not earned this yet." Nia smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. You have a lot of work to do, Julian. You need to learn who you are when you do not have a crisis to manage or a woman to blame. You need to fix the parts of yourself that allowed Camilla to blind you. And I need to go to work. I will accept the position of vice president. I will help you save the company. I will work beside you every day, but I will go home to my own apartment. I will pay my own bills. And maybe one day, when we are both whole, we can ask this question again. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. She did not wait for him to stand. She walked to the door of the diner, the place where she had scrubbed dishes and where she had been offered the world. She turned back one last time. Do not wait for me, Julian, she said. Work on yourself. That is the only way this ever works. She walked out into the cool night air, leaving the ring on the table. She was not a wife. She was not a maid. She was Nia Rivera, vice president, and she was finally free. The gala hall at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a sea of flashing cameras and murmuring voices, but for once, the noise was not born of scandal. It was born of admiration. On every table in the center of the room sat a copy of the latest issue of Forbes magazine. The cover did not feature a tech mogul or a hedge fund manager. It featured a woman in a stark white suit standing tall against a backdrop of global flags. The headline read, "The Conscience of Capitalism: How Nia Rivera Went from Invisible to Invincible." Nia stood on the balcony overlooking the event. She took a sip of sparkling water and looked down at the magazine. It felt surreal. 2 years ago, she had been in a jail cell wearing an orange jumpsuit. Now, she was a United Nations goodwill ambassador and a strategic diplomat brokering deals that protected workers' rights in developing nations. She had spent the last 24 months traveling the world not as a tourist, but as a force for change. She had faced down corrupt officials in Southeast Asia and negotiated fair wage treaties in South America. She had built her own empire just as she promised she would. She was no longer defined by the men who had tried to destroy her, or the men who had tried to save her. She was defined by her work. The crowd below parted and Julian Thorne stepped onto the stage. He looked different. The sharp edges of his anxiety were gone, replaced by a calm, grounded strength. His hair had a touch more gray at the temples, a testament to the sleepless nights he had spent rebuilding his company from the ground up. He adjusted the microphone and the room fell silent. 2 years ago, this company was a symbol of arrogance. Julian began, his voice steady and humble. We chased profit at the expense of people. We ignored the truth because it was inconvenient. But we were saved by a woman who taught us that transparency is the only currency that matters. Today, thanks to the guidance of the Alphaid Consortium and the relentless ethical standards we have adopted, Thorne Enterprises is proud to announce the opening of 50 new educational centers in the communities where we operate. We are no longer just taking from the world. We are giving back. The applause was thunderous. Julian did not bask in it. He looked up toward the balcony. He found her eyes across the distance. He nodded a small private gesture of gratitude. He had kept his word. He had purged the company of the rot. He had fired the yes men and hired critics. He had spent 2 years in therapy unlearning the entitlement that had almost cost him his soul. He had become the man Nia knew he could be. Nia walked down the grand staircase. The crowd watched her with reverence. She moved through the room and the sea of people parted to let her pass. She stopped in front of Julian. He stepped off the stage and stood before her. He did not try to touch her. He simply looked at her with a mixture of awe and love that had only deepened with time and distance. You look good, Nia said, a genuine smile touching her lips. You look like a man who finally sleeps at night. I do sleep, Julian replied softly. Because I have nothing left to hide. The company is clean, Nia. The books are open. The sheikh is happy. But none of it means anything if I am still standing here alone. He reached into his pocket. For a moment, Nia thought he would pull out the ring again. But he did not. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the resignation letter she had written 2 years ago, the one he had refused to accept. I kept this, he said, to remind me that I had to earn you back. I am not asking you to be my vice president anymore. You have outgrown this company. You have outgrown me, but I'm asking for a chance to walk beside you. Not in front of you, not saving you, just with you." Nia looked at the paper and then at the man. She saw the work he had done. She saw the humility in his posture. She saw that he had destroyed his own ego to make room for her. She had built her own kingdom, and he had cleaned his own house. They were no longer a prince and a pauper. They were two sovereigns standing on equal ground. She reached out and took the paper from his hand. She tore it in half slowly, deliberately. The sound was crisp and final. "I am done walking alone," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have been to the other side of the world, Julian. I have seen everything, and the only thing I haven't seen is you." Julian smiled, and it was the brightest thing in the room. He stepped forward, closing the distance that had separated them for 2 long, painful years. He took her hand not to lead her, but to hold her. "Then, let's go home," he whispered. They turned and walked out of the gala together, leaving the magazine cover on the table. They did not need the applause. They did not need the cameras. They had the truth. And finally, after all the fire and the rain, they had each other. The International Summit in Geneva was a symphony of hushed conversations and the clinking of crystal glasses against the backdrop of the Swiss Alps. The air in the grand hall was thin and expensive, filled with the scent of old money and new power. Nia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silhouette framed against the twilight. She had just finished negotiating a multi-nation labor agreement, and the adrenaline was still humming beneath her skin. She was no longer the woman who shrank into the background. She was the woman the room revolved around. Dignitaries and CEOs waited for a moment of her time, but she had eyes only for the man approaching her from the shadows of the terrace. Julian walked toward her with a grace that had replaced his old swagger. He wore his tuxedo not as a uniform of superiority, but simply as clothing. He stopped a respectful distance away, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. He knew she did not drink when she was working. He handed her one, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was electric, grounded in a history that no one else in the room could comprehend. "You commanded that stage today." Julian said, his voice low and filled with a quiet reverence. "I watched the delegation from Beijing. They were terrified of you. You spoke their language better than they did, and you did not let them hide behind protocol." Nia took a sip of the water, her eyes locking onto his. "I learned how to read between the lines in a very difficult school," she replied, her tone playful but sharp. "I learned that what people say is rarely what they mean, especially when there is money on the table." Julian smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He looked out at the room, at the sea of interpreters and aides scurrying after their bosses. "I tried to replace you, you know," he admitted softly. "After you left. After the trial. I hired linguists from Oxford. I brought in translators who had worked for the United Nations. They were technically perfect. They knew every dialect and every idiom, but they were useless." He turned back to her, his gaze intense and vulnerable. "They only translated the words, Nia. They never translated the intent. They never saw the traps. They were too afraid of me to tell me when I was walking into a fire. I realized something during those long, empty months." He took a step closer, closing the gap between them until they were standing toe-to-toe, equals on the world stage. "I still haven't found a translator better than you," he whispered. Nia looked at him. She saw the man who had once accused her of theft now standing before her, as a man who valued her mind above all else. She saw the scars of his redemption and the sincerity of his respect. She swirled the water in her glass, a small smile playing on her lips. "That is because you did not need a translator. Julian," she said, "you needed a shock. You needed someone who did not care about your bank account or your title. You needed someone who saw the man beneath the suit and did not like what she saw." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that cut through the noise of the gala. "And you haven't found anyone who dares to slap you awake, right?" Julian laughed. It was a rich, hearty sound that drew glances from the nearby tables. He shook his head, the memory of the dishwater and the harsh truths of the past playing in his mind not as a nightmare, but as the turning point of his life. "No," He admitted, his eyes shining with affection. Everyone else just wants to kiss the ring. You were the only one brave enough to bruise the ego. And I thank God for that every single day. I do not want a yes man, Nia. I want you, the one who wakes me up. Nia placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him. The past was a heavy book, but they had finally finished reading it. Then stay awake, she said softly, because we have a lot of work to do. The night air was crisp against their skin, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating between them. They stood on the balcony of the World Stage, two figures silhouetted against the glow of the Swiss mountains. The gala inside continued its symphony of polite conversation and clinking glass, but out here in the twilight, the only thing that mattered was the space between them, which was closing by the second. Julian reached out his hand. It was a formal gesture, the kind of handshake that concluded billion-dollar deals and finalized treaties. But as their palms met, the formality dissolved instantly. His fingers wrapped around hers, firm and grounding. It was not the grip of a boss taking possession of an employee. It was the hold of a drowning man who had finally found the shore. He did not shake her hand and let go. He held on. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a silent apology and a silent promise all at once. Nia looked down at their joined hands. She remembered the grease and the dirt of the diner kitchen. She remembered the cold steel of the handcuffs. She remembered the way he used to look past her, as if she were made of glass. And now she looked up at him and saw only absolute, undivided attention. He was holding her hand as if it were the most precious thing he had ever touched. He was holding it longer than was necessary, longer than was professional, and neither of them cared. A smile bloomed on her face. It was not the polite smile she used for diplomats. It was the soft, genuine smile of a woman who had fought a war and won. Julian returned it, his eyes crinkling at the corners. In that look, they shared 1,000 unspoken words. They acknowledged the pain, the betrayal, the fire, and the redemption. They were no longer the billionaire and the maid. They were simply Julian and Nia. He squeezed her hand one last time, a signal that he was ready to follow wherever she led. They turned together toward the light of the hall, ready to face the world not as adversaries, but as partners. As they walked back into the room, the echo of their story lingered in the night air, a testament to the power of standing one's ground. The true measure of a human being is never found in the texture of the uniform they wear. It is not found in the title on their business card or the balance in their bank account. It is found in the courage it takes to speak when everyone else is silent. It is found in the strength of the voice that rises when the truth is threatened. A uniform can be taken away. A fortune can be lost. But the integrity of a soul that refuses to bow to injustice is a diamond that cannot be destroyed. That is the only wealth that matters in the end. The story of Julian and Nia serves as a powerful testament to the fact that true worth is never defined by a title, a bank account, or the uniform one wears. At the beginning of their journey, Julian represented the classic tragedy of arrogance. He believed that his status placed him above the need to listen, blinding him to the reality that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected places. He measured people by their utility to his empire rather than their inherent human value, a mistake that nearly cost him his legacy. This teaches us that the moment we stop listening to those we deem beneath us is the moment we begin to fall. Conversely, Nia's journey illustrates the indomitable nature of integrity. In a world that often rewards silence and complicity, she chose the harder path of truth. She demonstrated that dignity is not a gift bestowed by the powerful, but a fire nurtured from within. Her refusal to be bought, intimidated, or diminished reminds us that our character is the only possession that cannot be taken from us unless we surrender it. She showed that true power lies not in commanding others, but in mastering oneself and standing firm in one's convictions, even when standing alone. Furthermore, the evolution of their relationship offers a profound lesson on redemption and equality. Julian's transformation required him to dismantle his ego and rebuild his life on a foundation of humility. He had to learn that an apology is just words, but changed behavior is the only true apology. By the end, they stood as equals not because Nia had ascended to his tax bracket, but because Julian had finally risen to meet her moral standard. The narrative ultimately reminds us that the strongest partnerships, in business and in love, are not those formed between a master and a servant, but between two whole individuals who respect the light in one another. It is a call to look beyond the surface, to value truth over comfort, and to remember that the quietest voice in the room often has the most important thing to say. If this story of integrity, courage, and redemption resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice matters.